All right, so on your sheet of paper, make sure you have down what is Marxism at the top. Make sure you have down the question, who was Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels? And make sure you write down 3 interesting facts on Marxism that you get from the video, all right? Just 3 interesting facts, all right?
Like and subscribe to support more simple and effective videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support more simple and objective videos on topics that matter. In this video, we'll take a look at the basics of what you should know about Marxism. First, what is Marxism? Marxism is a social, political, and economic philosophy that is mostly about the battle between the working class and the ownership class, and favors communism and socialism over capitalism. Marxism was first publicly formulated in 1848 in the pamphlet The Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, which lays out the theory of class struggle and revolution. It inspects the effects of capitalism on labor, productivity, and economic development, and argues for a worker revolution to overturn capitalism in favor of communism. Marxism hypothesizes that the struggle between social classes, specifically between the bourgeoisie, or capitalists, and the proletariat, or workers, defines economic relations in a capitalist economy and will inevitably lead to revolutionary communism. Marx's class theory portrays capitalism as one step in the historical progression of economic systems that follow one another in a natural sequence by vast and personal forces of history that happen due to the behavior and conflict among social classes. According to Marx, every society is divided into social classes, whose members have more in common with one another than with members of other social classes. The following is the basis of Marx's theories of how class conflict would play out in a capitalist system. First, in a capitalist society, there are 2 classes, the bourgeoisie or business owners, who control the means of production, and the proletariat or workers, whose labor transforms raw commodities into valuable economic goods. Second, ordinary laborers, who do not own the means of production, such as factories, buildings, and materials, have little power in the capitalist economic system. Workers are also readily replaceable in periods of high unemployment, further devaluing their perceived worth. Third, to maximize profits, business owners have an incentive to get the most work out of their laborers while paying them the lowest possible wages. This creates an unfair imbalance between owners and laborers, whose work the owners exploit for their own gain. Fourth, because workers have little personal stake in the process of production, Marx believed that they would become alienated from it, as well as from their own humanity, and turn resentful toward business owners. Fifth, the bourgeoisie also employs social institutions, including government, media, academia, organized religion, and banking and financial systems, as tools and weapons against the proletariat, with the goal of maintaining their position of power and privilege. Lastly, the inherent inequalities and exploitative economic relations between these 2 classes will lead to a revolution in which the working class rebels against the bourgeoisie, takes control of the means of production, and abolishes capitalism. Marx thought that the capitalist system inherently contained the seeds of its own destruction, the separation and exploitation of the proletariat that are fundamental to capitalist relations would inevitably drive the working class to rebel against the bourgeoisie and seize control of the means of production. This revolution would be led by enlightened leaders known as the vanguard of the proletariat, who understood the class structure of society and who would unite the working class by raising awareness and class consciousness. As a result of the revolution, Marx predicted that private ownership of the means of production would be replaced by collective ownership, first under socialism and then under communism. In the final stage of human development, social classes and class struggle would no longer exist. Although Marx inspired multitudes of followers, there are 3 criticisms of Marxism. First, Marx believed that increasing competition would not produce better goods for consumers, Instead, it would lead to bankruptcy among capitalists and the rise of monopolies as fewer and fewer were left to control production. Yet, experts argue that capitalism has not collapsed as a result of fierce competition. And although markets have changed over time, they haven't led to the prevalence of monopolies. Second, he believed the market economy, which by its nature is unplanned, would experience huge supply and demand problems and cause severe depressions. Although there have been recessions and depressions, experts believe that they are not thought to be an inherent feature of free markets. Lastly, a society without competition, money, and private property has never materialized, and the history of the 20th century suggests it is unlikely and unworkable concept. What are your thoughts about Marxism? If you enjoyed this video, please like and comment on the video. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Illustrate to Educate.
Alright, so based off of what we saw, what we just watched, give y'all a little hint before I ask the question. That's good.
Alright, so just off the top of your head, based off what you just got from the video, raise your hand if you think you have a general idea what Marxism is. Raise your hand if you think you know what Marxism is. Jackson Harris, what you got?
It's theory about the working class versus the ownership class fighting against each other.
Okay, good. Alright, so good. That's actually a great explanation. Alright, so what Marxism is, just like you said, it's a theory, alright, a theory created by Karl Marx, alright. Karl Marx believed that there was a difference between working class and the ownership class, alright? And he believed in communism and socialism being over capitalism. Alright? Now, based off what we just read and what we just learned about, now, who can tell me who Karl Marx is, and who Frederick Engels is, and what did they write? What did they write? It's a trick question. I'm gonna see if anybody can tell me. Eric.
They wrote the Communist Manifesto.
Good, alright? That's why I put this up here for the hint, alright? It's right above it. They wrote the Communist Manifesto, alright? So Marxism was basically the foundation for communism, alright? So what we're gonna talk about today is simply gonna be the rise of communism in Russia, alright? But first thing first, I wanna give you 3 interesting facts, alright? I wanna get at least 3 interesting facts so I can make sure everybody has down at least 3. Somebody raise your hand and give me 1 interesting fact that you got. Jake.
At the end of this, they predicted that everybody would rebel against it and it would create bankruptcy.
Good. They predicted that if they continue with capitalism, everyone would try and compete with each other so much that it would ultimately lead to bankruptcy. All right? Karl Marx believed that. Kenneth, what you got? Oh, you not raising hand? All right. Anybody else got another fact? Any interesting fact that you got from the video? Jay, give me another.
Employees did not get paid a lot,
All right.
and they could get like for example, like so say this is an employee and then this is the owner. So the owner could be like, I'm gonna give you $50 if you come work for me right now, and then they're gonna start getting paid less and less and less.
Thanks, okay. Good, that's a good point that was brought up in the video. One more. Anybody have one more interesting fact from the video? It could be on Marxism, it could be on anything. All right, talk to me, Jay.
Marxism or whatever, it was founded in 1848, and there are 2 classes of it.
Okay, good. Founded in 1848, and there are 2 classes of it. All right, so right now, go to Google Classroom on your Chromebooks, and you're going to pull up your Rise of Communism slides, all right? Your Rise of Communism slides. They should be found under Material. I added them this morning. They should be found under Material, under Unit 3. Under Unit 3, set material, all right? All right, so I've shared them with you on Google Classroom. If you feel comfortable writing them down to help you remember more, you can write them down. Everything that you pretty much need to know is highlighted throughout the slides. But if not, if you all just want to follow along, you can just follow along here on the board because I did share them with you all so you will have access to them at home. All right, so autocracy or autocracy, however you prefer to say it, all right? During the 21st century, Russia was the only true autocracy or autocracy left in Europe, all right? Russia's Tsar, or king, was the absolute ruler believed to be anointed by God. The Romanov family ruled Russia from 1613 until the Russian Revolution in 1917. In 1884, Tsar Nicholas II became the last aristocratic ruler of Russia. Alright? So, right here you have a picture of the Tsar Nicholas II. Alright? He was the last aristocratic ruler to come through Russia. Now, right here, Russia divided, or divided Russia. Someone raise your hand to read this slide for me. Somebody raise your hand to read this slide. Marley.
For many years before World War I, Russia's citizens suffered under the Romanov
Monarchy.
monarchy. Russia was divided into two groups: the ruling class, who held the country's wealth, and the serfs, peasants, who barely had enough food. Peasants worked for little pay and had few rights.
Good. All right. Russia divided. All right. So even for years before World War I, they suffering under the Romanov monarchy. All right. Russia was divided into two groups. Raise your hand. You can tell me those two groups. What she just say? What were the two groups? Jay.
They were the wealths and serfs.
Good. The wealth and the serfs. All right. You had the ruling class, which we considered the wealthy, and then you had the serfs, which you can see would be considered the peasants. All right. So the peasants, they barely had enough food to eat, and they often worked for little or no pay, all right, and they had very few rights. So make sure you know that, all right. This goes back to what we talked about with Marxism, there being a separation in classes, all right, between the serfs and the royalty or the wealthy, all right. So the serf life. In exchange for working long hours for a landlord, the serf received a small log hut, a tiny piece of land, and a few animals. Most of the serfs' crops went to pay the landlord's taxes. Anyone who resisted the rules were beaten with a leather or wire whip. Many tried to escape, but few succeeded, all right? So just based off what you're hearing, this sounds a lot like what? Yep, sounds a lot like slavery. Good, Lachlan. So, noticing the difference between the wealthy classes, all right, between the classes, you have the serfs, who would be considered the peasants, working for the wealthy, all right? So, just like in the slave times, all right, you had the wealthy, and then you had the slaves. So this is very similar to that. The only difference is they did receive a log hut, a tiny piece of land, and they were given few animals. But they worked for little to nothing, and they barely had enough materials to purchase food and other resources. All right, Bloody Sunday. Bloody Sunday. Jackson Harris, read to me the first point under Bloody Sunday.
In 1905, Russia lost the war with Japan, which angered many serfs and workers because their family members were forced to fight in war.
All right, good. So in 1905, Russia lost a war with Japan, all right? And the reason why it angered many of the serfs, because many of their family members were the ones who were sent off to go fight in the war, all right? And many of them did not return. Somebody raise your hand and read the second point. Mason Mullis.
On January 22nd, thousands of people marched on the Winter Palace to ask Tsar Nicholas for reforms.
Good, all right? Jay, read the next point.
Palace troops shot people in the crowd. This became known as Bloody Sunday.
All right, and Lachlan, read that last point for me.
More and more riots began to occur after this.
All right, so Bloody Sunday, all right, just as an overview. So after losing the war to Japan in 1905, many of the serfs decided to march to the Winter Palace. All right, they wanted to address Tsar Nicholas for reforms, all right? So the palace troops shot the people in the crowd, and this is how it became known as Bloody Sunday, all right? It became known as Bloody Sunday because all of the serfs, or the people that lost their lives, as they marched to the palace to address the Tsar. World War I. When Russia entered World War I in 1914, many of its peasants were forced to join the army. They were not trained or equipped to fight, and many were sent into battle without enough clothes, shoes, or weapons to survive. Over 2 million soldiers were killed, and nearly 5 million were wounded. Russia's people were also struggling with food shortages and not having enough coal to keep warm. So right now, as you see, We're talking about World War I right here, okay? So now, we're talking about when Russia first entered World War I in 1914. All right? Many of the people fighting in the battle for Russia were the serfs, all right? So they were the peasants, all right? Those were the people who did not have a lot of money, who did not have a lot of property, who did not have that much of an income or a good source of living, all right? Now, as you can see, a keynote is that they were sending them into the war not well trained or equipped to fight. What you got? Yes, sir. Appreciate it. As you can see, many of them were being sent into the war not well trained and not equipped to fight. So by this happening, that caused for many fatalities. Over 2 million soldiers were killed and nearly 5 million were wounded. All right? So just based off of that, the Tsar, naturally that's going to cause problems, right? If I'm sending people off to fight and they don't have any training, they don't have any materials, they're low on clothing, they're low on weapons, naturally as a people, wouldn't you want to be mad at me if I was your ruler sending men off to fight like that?
Yes.
So naturally it's going to cause problems, all right? So let's see what problems it causes. Somebody raise your hand and read under Tsar Nicholas. Lachlan, read the first point for me.
The Russian people blamed their Tsar for entering the war and getting so many killed or wounded.
All right, good. So they blame the Tsar. The Russian people blame the Tsar for entering the war and getting so many people killed and wounded. Somebody raise your hand and read the second point. Let's go, Mason.
Tsar Nicholas II ignored the fact that his people were suffering and unhappy.
All right. So go ahead and read the second point anyway.
Oh, he was weak as a weak man. He was seen as a weak man and became increasingly remote as a ruler.
All right, good. So he was ignoring the fact that his people were suffering and unhappy. Because he was doing this, many of his people, many of the serfs, they began to see him as a weak man, and he became increasingly remote as a ruler. All right. So remote means almost as if an outcast. No one liked him. Almost as if he was on his own, and his own country was against him. All right. Jay, give me the last point for me, if you don't mind, sir.
Yes, sir. He did not see that changes were needed in the way that his country was run.
All right, good. He did not see that changes were needed in the way his country was ran.
Can I use the restroom?
Yes, sir. I'm signing up. All right. Change. In early 1917, thousands of workers filled the streets and began to riot. Men and women protested against the Tsar's failing government. Tsar Nicholas ordered his army to end the riots, but the people outnumbered them, and the military could not keep the peace. Jason Harris, you had a question? Or you want to read it?
Oh, I was just curious, so I'm really back after him.
Yeah, you know what I'm back. All right, so under change, all right, so in 1917, all right, the workers began to fill the streets, all right, they began to riot all over again. All right, men and women protested. All right, then after they protested, the Tsar tried to order the armies to stop them, but sadly the armies were outnumbered, and the military could not control the crowds. They could not keep the peace. The revolution. Somebody raise your hand and read the revolution for me. Somebody read the first point. Miss Marley.
Workers united against the Russian ruler, and on March 15, 1917, the Tsar Nicholas II abdicated his throne.
Good. All right. So workers united against the Russian ruler, and Tsar Nicholas abdicated his throne. Lock, read the next point for me.
The Tsar and his family were captured.
All right. The Tsar was captured, and then Mason, what's the last point?
A new government took over Russia.
Good. All right. So that's what the revolution is. You want to grab him? All right, you got him. All right. So the revolution. The workers united against the Tsar. He abdicated his throne. His family was later captured, and a new government began to take over.
There'll be no drama practice today. Please make sure that you make arrangements for getting home. Just a few reminders. Girls basketball, 6th grade, 4:30 to 5:30. Boys, 7th and 8th grade, 6:30 to 8 o'clock. And wrestling, 3:30 to 6.
Remember that, boys. You coming to boys basketball tryouts? I'm not coming. Boys tryouts not to 6:30. All right, remember that. Not to 6:30. Girls, y'all at 4:30. But I had to push mine back because I'll be at football practice. All right. So boys, if you're going to a boys basketball tryout, you can get at 6:30. All right. The Duma. Someone raise your hand to read the first point for the Duma.
The Duma was the Russian Congress.
Good. All right, Molly, want to read the second point for me?
There were 3 attempts to make the Duma work, but each was too radical and still favored only the wealthiest Russians.
Good. Okay, next point.
In the end, there were just too many problems.
All right, and lastly, talk to me, Caitlin. You okay? Talk to me.
It was time for a new revolution.
All right, good. So the Duma was the new Russian Congress. All right. The other key point, the big thing to remember about the Duma is there were 3 attempts to make the Duma work, but each was too radical, and the key point was that they all still favored the wealthiest of Russians. All right. So ultimately, what we first saw was going on as a problem was still being a factor because everything was still favoring the wealthy. All right, everything was still favoring the wealthy. Lenin, in October 1917, a revolutionary group called the Bolshevik or Communist Party seized power. All right, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, took control of the Russian government. Lenin ordered the Tsar and his family to be executed. All right, he ordered them to be executed. Keep in mind, they were already captured at this point. All right, but he ordered for them to be executed. The Soviet Union. Somebody raise their hand and read the first point. Let's go, Ms. Avery. Read the first point for me. All right, good. Lenin declared himself dictator. The second point. Make some others.
In 1922, Lenin established the Soviet Union, the first communist country in the world.
Good. All right. So in 1922, the Soviet Union was established as the first communist country in the world. Miss Revere, you want to read the next point for me? The next highlighted one.
Lenin promised that communists would bring fairness and equality to all citizens.
Good. Block, you want to read the last one?
Over time, communism spread to other parts of the world. Cuba, China, North Korea, Vietnam.
All right, good. So, make sure that you know, after Lenin declaring himself dictator of Russia, all right, he established the Soviet Union, all right, that was known as the first communist country in the world. What's one? Yes, that's Title II. All right, so Lenin promised that communism would bring fairness and equality to all Soviets. Over time, communism spread to other parts of the world. All right, so Lenin's outlook on it was if one person had all the control, or if one organization had all the control, they could evenly distribute everything to where everyone received the same amount of rewards. All right. So last part, wrapping it up real soon. What is it? All right. Communism is a theory based on the ideas of the German philosopher Karl Marx. All right. This goes back to the first video that we watched. All right. Marx published the Communist Manifesto in 1848. And in it, he said that capitalism divided people into 3 classes: the rich, the middle, and the poor. Marx believed that the poor class would one day rise up and overthrow the wealthy rulers, creating a new society without classes. People would work together and share everything as a community. All right, so once again, Marx believed that the poor would one day rise up and overturn or overthrow the upper class or the rich class. All right, but in doing that, he also believed that by that happening, it would eventually lead to people working together and sharing everything as a community. Now, raise your hand if you think that actually worked out. Whenever you think of a communist party, do we think of everything being fair? Do we think of everything working out? What's that?
Nothing's fair in a communist.
All right, good. So, communism. Right here, somebody raise your hand, read the first point under communism. Say,
Communism says that the government should own the farms and factories for the benefit of all its citizens.
all right, good. Go ahead, keep going.
Everyone should share the work equally and receive an equal share of the reward.
Alright, so they said, government should own the farms and factories for the benefit of all of the citizens. Everyone should share the work equally and receive an equal share of the rewards. Somebody raise your hand to read the next point. Let's go, let's go.
This appeal was granted to many Russians because there was such a huge split between the rich and poor.
Alright, and Lockie, the last one.
Unfortunately, the system did not work, and Russian people continued to suffer for years to come.
Alright, good. So, right here. It appealed greatly because even the people noticed the huge split between the rich and the poor. But, unfortunately, the system did not work, and Russia's people continued to suffer for years to come. Alright? So, the next thing that I want you all to do, alright,